The United Kingdom and the United States haven't been so united over the past few years. It's actually been a roller coaster of a ride, full of ups and downs that have left British citizens regretting every decision they've ever made since 2016. So what's the ride like? Are these two great countries on good terms? Well, Brexit has pretty much made free trade impossible. Join us as we talk about whether the UK and US are friends or foes. In 2016, a referendum was held to decide whether or not the UK has a future with the European Union. When over 50% of the population voted to leave, they were promised economic prosperity, reduced cost of living, more jobs, and a better standard of living. What did they get in return? Trade blocs that made everything 1,000 times more expensive, high inflation, limited immigration, raised cost of living, and an absolute nightmare to think of starting a business. One of the promises made by Brexit supporters was the establishment of a comprehensive free trade agreement with the United States. They thought that if they were free from the shackles of European countries, the United Kingdom could improve relations with the world's #1 superpower. But was anything as such done while Donald Trump was president? Well, there were already discussions about the possibility of an FTA, which is a free trade agreement. The Trump administration was very interested in establishing a trade deal, and on October 16, 2018, Trump notified Congress of his intent to negotiate an agreement. Things were looking really good for Great Britain. This agreement was really going to emphasize the word "great" in its name. But when the details about goods and services were being discussed, they reached a little road bump. The UK wasn't ready to open its market to certain US agricultural products such as hormone-treated beef. But then, the COVID-19 virus hit in 2020 and the world went into lockdown. The pandemic halted any further negotiations. In the meantime, America was going through changes of its own. With Joe Biden's inauguration in January 2021, the chances of a UK-USA FTA were pretty much non-existent. The Biden administration had different priorities. They focused on domestic economic recovery and infrastructure rather than international trade agreements. After all, the damage that the pandemic was doing to countries all around the world was a problem on its own. Wait, just to put things in perspective, look at how steep the drop is in global markets in 2020. 4 years later, the world is still struggling to recover. The GDPs of many countries reached negative digits because the whole world was on pause. You see, before this, the UK was negotiating with the Republican Party, but after 2021, a new tenure with the Democrats led by Joe Biden meant a call for new agreements to be made. The two presidents had different priorities, and trade with the United Kingdom wasn't of immediate importance to the US. In other words, Biden wasn't ready for new trade agreements. Any word on a US-UK FTA has been on indefinite pause since 2021. The United States has its own problems and has not considered the United Kingdom a priority. One of these issues was the opposition from within the Democratic Party that made it impossible to push new trade agreements. They wouldn't agree with anything unless American workers were given full benefits. But not all blame was put on the Biden administration. Brexit proved to be a problem because it complicated negotiations altogether. The UK, being fresh out of the European Union, struggled to jot down what their standards were and what the long game for their trade agreements would be. The US was so used to following EU standards that they weren't sure where to find a meeting point with an independent United Kingdom. On top of that, the US would rather prioritise trade with European countries since it would benefit the country more. Believe it or not, Brexit has also affected the United States. How? Well, let's talk about how it's affecting the United Kingdom first. Who would have thought that parting ways with the European Union would have irreparable damage to our trade relations with other countries? Brexit has been trying to find stability for as long as anyone can remember. The time since January 31st, 2020 feels like an eternity. The UK transitioned to a new trading relationship with European countries governed by the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, or TCA for short. This came into effect on January 1st, 2021, a year after the 2016 referendum was finalised. Now, this agreement aims to maintain zero tariffs and quotas on goods. However, it did introduce a bunch of non-tariff restrictions and barriers that have made trade the hardest thing ever for some British citizens. This, in turn, had a tremendous impact on imports and exports. The people over at Aston University did the math and pointed out that UK goods exports to the EU fell by 27% between 2021 and 2023. Imports dropped by 32%. On top of that, the variety of goods exported from the UK to the EU decreased significantly. In fact, there have been 1,645 fewer categories of British products shipped to the EU nation as compared to pre-Brexit levels. But what's causing all these issues? Are there political indifferences or something more internal? Well, when the United Kingdom voted to leave in the 2016 referendum, they were signing up for the worst economic crisis ever. In the agricultural sector, which was one of the areas where the UK and US had issues, the export value of edible fruits and nuts has plummeted by 73.5%. Clothing production, on the other hand, has declined by more than 50%. There are many other goods and services that have been affected by Brexit. One of the biggest reasons is the introduction of non-tariff barriers. These are a list of unnecessarily long and expensive custom checks, regulatory compliance costs, and other problems that overcomplicate trade with EU countries. The TCA doesn't really cover non-tariff barriers, so businesses struggle to adapt to the new trade laws. If trading with European countries is this difficult, just imagine how hard it must be to trade with another continent. See, small businesses are affected the most by the new trade laws. Many smaller British manufacturers have completely ceased exporting to certain EU countries because of the post-Brexit complications. A report said that small firms faced a 29% reduction in exports to the EU compared to the larger ones that could bear the additional expenses. When comparing the data year by year or even month by month, trends show that 2023 has seen steeper declines than previous years. These are hardly getting better in 2024, even when the UK built new non-EU relations. Fewer and fewer investors are placing their bets in the UK because of the instability. They would rather play it safe and invest in American startups. Not only does this affect the UK's GDP, it's like there needs to be a good relationship with the US, or else British citizens will start setting up camp elsewhere. The British government was successful in negotiating many free trade agreements with countries like Australia and New Zealand. But then again, the European Union was their best bet at economic stability, and trade with Australia just won't compensate for losses. It's hit them so hard that even 36 new FTAs aren't helping meet full economic expectations. The main issue is where the United Kingdom is located in the first place. It's surrounded by countries from the EU, which makes convenient trading very inconvenient. So how does this affect the United States? Let's talk about it. The US and UK have a rich trading history and were considered to be the top two superpowers of the planet. China would hardly be put in the equation because of how strong these two were. In 2023, they had a bilateral trade of around £310.8 billion, a 7.6% increase from previous years. The US itself accounted for 17.6% of the total UK trade. Soon after Brexit, there was hope for US and UK free trade agreements. As you know by now, the Trump administration was interested in trading with the United Kingdom, but because of the pandemic and change in presidency, things couldn't really take off the way they were supposed to. Even when the US and UK relations had its fair share of challenges, there was some hope. In 2023, total UK exports to the US reached £191.5 billion, a 9.3% increase from 2022. Imports from the US totaled up to £119.4 billion, up by 4.9%. Surprisingly, the relations aren't completely ruined after Brexit, but keep in mind there are still a lot of issues internally. Apart from different administrations and the pandemic, what are those issues? Well, agriculture and workforce trades proved to be a problem ever since the Democratic Party took charge of America. American businesses have also reported an increase in costs regarding customs checks and regulatory compliance when trading with the UK post-Brexit. The 2016 referendum also influenced foreign direct investment flows between the two countries. The UK's exit from the EU raised concerns about how investments were going to be a problem for the US. In 2021, US FDI in the UK reached £675.7 billion, while UK investments in the US totaled around £461.4 billion. These figures are bound to fluctuate, meaning a lot of companies could quite possibly reconsider their strategies. As companies reassess their operations because of Brexit, there is evidence of a trend where some British firms are seeking listings on US exchanges rather than remaining in London. Looks like David Cameron and Theresa May have been doing the opposite of helping Great Britain thrive economically. But what have the newer Prime Ministers done? If you're enjoying this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel and stay up to date with more informative and educational content like this. Taking office in October 2022 meant that the Conservative Party had to deal with a lot of the post-Brexit complications. However, it knew that maintaining and strengthening ties with the United States would be the most beneficial option for the United Kingdom. If you thought Theresa May and David Cameron were harming US-UK relations, the tenures of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss hit just as hard. But who could blame them? Everyone was struggling with the post-Brexit era and a lot of new, different policy priorities. Inflation was at an all-time high, and when Sunak took office, he aimed to reduce it by half the initial amount and did what the previous Prime Ministers couldn't. He made a life-changing deal with the United States. In June 2023, Sunak and Biden signed the Atlantic Declaration. This aimed at reinforcing economic ties between the two countries. Instead of a full trade deal, they decided to take it slow and only talk about the parts where they might actually agree. It included comments to ease trade barriers, strengthen dense industry links, and collaborate on the growing tech world, meaning artificial intelligence. The Atlantic Declaration meant that there was no longer a need for a comprehensive FTA. Sunak said that there was no time to be sentimental about the agreements they made. It was time for an effective and practical approach. He also handled the Northern Ireland Protocol issue pretty well. This has been a slight problem when talking about US-UK relations. The Biden administration expressed their concerns over potential violations of international law related to Brexit arrangements in Northern Ireland. But wait, what was happening in Northern Ireland? This calls for a separate discussion before moving further along Sunak's attempts at strengthening US-UK relations. When the United Kingdom left the European Union, it faced a lot of economic instability, yes, but it seems like Northern Ireland faced the most challenges after 2020. Imagine two countries, the Republic of Ireland and Great Britain, are getting all the benefits they can scrape off the bottom of the barrel after Brexit, while Northern Ireland gets dust. This is what was happening because trade agreements were never in Northern Ireland's favour. With the new customs checks, tariff barriers and trade blocs, especially in the agricultural sector, which this region relies on the most, Northern Ireland was going through a very rough patch. The Good Friday Agreement was signed in 1998 to bring peace to the region by establishing a power-sharing government. It also aimed to remove any physical borders between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. It was as if Brexit just threw a 2-decade-old argument in the bin. The Northern Ireland Protocol, part of the withdrawal agreement between the UK and EU, was designed to prevent strict borders on the island of Ireland by keeping Northern Ireland aligned with certain EU regulations. This arrangement has led to a de facto customs border in the Irish Sea, which meant that the Unionists of Great Britain and Nationalists of the Republic of Ireland were not seeing eye to eye. If things couldn't have gotten worse, the United Kingdom set up trade blocs in its own country. How could they plan relations with the US when their own constituents were fighting? In 2023, Unionist parties, especially the Democratic Unionist Party from Northern Ireland, were angry about the protocol. They refused to run the government at Stormont because they felt it was pointless. Nobody was listening to their concerns, and tensions were rising, with the threat of violence not far off. Biden's team got involved, saying parts of the protocol broke international law, specifically agreements from the Good Friday Agreement, which is an international treaty. Changing the GFA isn't something you can just do without careful planning. Article 2 of the protocol stated that the UK government had to make sure that there wouldn't be any diminishment or cutting back of rights after leaving the European Union. So what happened next? In March 2023, the Windsor Framework was adopted, and it aimed to simplify trade agreements between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Sunak was getting things together by addressing a problem that had been ignored for far too long. It was a two-bird, one-stone kind of deal for him. Not only was Sunak sorting out internal conflicts with Ireland and Great Britain, but he was also appealing to the Biden administration to improve US-UK relations. What was next for the Prime Minister? Businesses were struggling and no one wanted to invest in the UK because of high corporate taxes and bad politics. Unfortunately, Sunak resigned with plans that never saw the light of day. Let's see what the current Prime Minister is doing to bring things back to normal, because if they didn't sort their own problems out, relations with the US were bound to be a problem. Keir Starmer of the Labour Party has been picking up the pieces that Sunak left him. Since his election in July 2024, he has emphasised bringing back the special relationship that the UK and United States once had, focusing on sectors like security, trade, and international diplomacy. Starmer targeted Washington and made moves at a NATO summit between July 9th and 11th, 2024. He wanted to make sure that the world saw the US as a key ally throughout all the issues that were going on around the world. The most important of these issues included the Russia and Ukraine war, along with rising tensions in China. During the summit, Starmer pointed out that both the UK and US have always had strong relations and that they should recommit to NATO. Both countries share common values and interests after all. So, speaking of the conflict in Ukraine, Starmer made it clear that the UK was going to provide military aid no matter what. The aid costs up to £3 billion annually. The sensitive topic of discussion was the crisis going on in Gaza and the Middle East. Starmer's administration knew that the US was supporting Israel and to maintain balance in its support by considering international laws, history, and foreign policies. But Starmer's tenure couldn't have come at a worse time. The presidential race is heating up ahead of November 2024, and the UK Prime Minister needs to know what the next move is for whenever the new president is announced. Starmer's Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, has also been vocal about maintaining strong ties with Washington regardless of who wins the election. Lammy is working on building relations with China as well, which is a very strategic move since that's the second largest country that the UK trades with. These changes are needed more than ever. Look at the trade with the US in the last 10 years and how it's plummeted here. Unlike other prime ministers, Starmer acknowledges the importance of cultural diplomacy in strengthening its ties with the US. When he visited Washington for NATO, he gave Biden a personal Arsenal Football Club jersey. Was this a smart move? Everyone was confused for quite a while, but to be honest, the way to strong negotiations and alliances is by being personal and friendly. Maybe that answers your question. Maybe the US and UK could quite possibly be friends under Starmer's tenure. He still has a ton of challenges ahead of him, and it's only going to get more difficult. Whether Donald Trump wins the elections or Kamala Harris, it's as if Starmer will have to start all over again with building a relationship. Looks like he'll have to customize a football jersey. But in all seriousness, conflicts like the Russia-Ukraine war, Gaza-Israel conflict, global warming, and a global recession, the United Kingdom will have to grind on all gears to bring trade with the United States back to pre-Brexit times. There have been ups and downs, and we know that if anything is constant, it's change. Whether it's a new president, prime minister, agreement, or conflict, what the United Kingdom needs to do is adjust to the post-Brexit era and sort out its relations with powerful forces. How much do you think that the people regret voting to leave the European Union back in 2016? Who knows? One vote could have had the two countries be on the best of terms today. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. See you in the next one.